When installing a sub-panel in a detached garage, deciding between a main breaker distribution panel and a main lug distribution panel is important. Both options have advantages and disadvantages. A main breaker distribution panel includes a main circuit breaker that safeguards the entire sub-panel. This means that in the event of an overload or short circuit within the sub-panel, the main breaker will trip, disconnecting power to the entire sub-panel. These panels tend to be more expensive than main lug panels. They generally offer enhanced safety features and may be mandated by specific regulations in certain localities. Conversely, a main lug distribution panel necessitates a separate main breaker to be installed in the service panel that feeds the sub-panel. Therefore, the protection for the sub-panel is located upstream at the main service panel. Main lug panels are typically less expensive than main breaker panels. They often offer fewer built-in safety features and may not comply with all building codes depending on the specific requirements of the jurisdiction. Given the plan to install only a few outlets initially and to upgrade the electrical service panel in the future, a main lug distribution panel presents a viable option. Firstly, it is more cost-effective, which can be appealing when budgeting for a temporary setup. Secondly, it satisfies the minimum requirements for a detached garage sub-panel in many areas, although local code should always be verified. Thirdly, the main lug can be readily replaced with the main breaker when the service panel is upgraded, providing flexibility for future expansion and enhanced safety. It's important to adhere to several key considerations during installation. Firstly, ensure that the main breaker protecting the sub-panel within the service panel is appropriately sized for the ampacity of the sub-panel's main lug. The ampacity refers to the current carrying capacity of the conductor. Selecting the correct breaker size is crucial for preventing overloads and ensuring safety. Secondly, install a grounding rod at the garage and ground the sub-panel properly. Grounding is essential for providing a path for fault current to return to the source, tripping the breaker and preventing electrical shock hazards. Proper grounding also helps to stabilize voltage and reduce electrical noise. Thirdly, utilize appropriate gauge wire for the sub-panel circuits based on the load requirements. Wire gauge determines the current carrying capacity of the wire. Using undersized wire can lead to overheating, voltage drop, and even fire hazards. Consult the National Electrical Code, NEC Table 310.15b16 for guidance on selecting the appropriate wire gauge based on the ampacity of the circuit. For instance, a 20 amp circuit typically requires 12 gauge copper wire, while a 15 amp circuit may use 14 gauge wire, but always refer to the NEC for the most accurate and up-to-date information. Code compliance is non-negotiable. Consulting the local building inspector or a qualified electrician is highly recommended to ensure adherence to all applicable codes and regulations. Electrical codes vary by jurisdiction, and failing to comply can result in fines, delays, and potential safety hazards. An electrician can provide expert guidance on local requirements and ensure that the installation is performed safely and correctly. Grounding involves connecting the sub-panel to a grounding electrode system, such as a grounding rod, which provides a low impedance path to ground. This helps to protect against electrical shock by providing a path for fault current to flow back to the source, tripping the circuit breaker or fuse and disconnecting power to the circuit. The size and type of grounding electrode required will depend on local codes and the size of the sub-panel. Wiring involves connecting the branch circuits to the sub-panel, ensuring that each circuit is properly sized and protected by a circuit breaker or fuse. The size of the wire used for each circuit will depend on the load it is expected to carry. Consult the NEC for guidance on selecting the appropriate wire size and overcurrent protection for each circuit. When dealing with electrical installations, safety is paramount. Always disconnect power to the circuit before working on any electrical components. Use appropriate personal protective equipment, such as insulated gloves and safety glasses. If unsure about any aspect of the installation, consult a qualified electrician. Furthermore, consider the long-term needs of the garage. While initially only a few outlets may be needed, future plans may include power tools, lighting, or even electric vehicle charging. Planning for these future needs now can save time and money in the long run. This might involve installing a larger sub-panel than initially required or running additional circuits to accommodate future loads. Consider the available space in the garage. The sub-panel must be mounted in a location that is accessible and provides adequate clearance for working on the electrical connections. Ensure that the location is free from moisture and other environmental hazards. Also, consider the aesthetics of the installation. While functionality is the primary concern, a neat and professional installation can enhance the overall appearance of the garage. Take the time to route wires neatly and securely and to properly label all circuit. Remember that electrical work can be dangerous, and it's important to take all necessary precautions to protect yourself and others. If unsure about any aspect of the installation, do not hesitate to seek professional assistance. Remember to check local electrical codes before beginning any work. These codes may dictate specific requirements for sub-panel installations, including the type of panel allowed, the size of the grounding electrode, and the wiring methods used. Contacting the local building inspector or a qualified electrician is the best way to ensure compliance with all applicable codes and regulations. When upgrading the electrical service panel in the future, consider replacing the main lug with a main breaker in the sub-panel. This provides an additional layer of protection and can simplify troubleshooting in the event of an electrical problem. A main breaker in the sub-panel allows for disconnecting power to the entire sub-panel without having to go back to the main service panel. Also, when upgrading the electrical service panel, consider increasing the ampacity of the sub-panel feed. This will allow for more power to be available in the garage, which can be useful for running power tools or other high-demand equipment. The size of the sub-panel feed will depend on the anticipated load in the garage. A qualified electrician can help determine the appropriate size for the sub-panel feed and ensure that it is properly installed. Ensure that all electrical connections are tight and secure. Loose connections can cause overheating, voltage drop, and even fire hazards. Use a torque wrench to tighten all connections to the manufacturer's specified torque. Check all connections periodically to ensure that they remain tight. After completing the installation, test all circuits to ensure that they are working properly. Use a multimeter to verify that the voltage is correct and that there are no shorts or grounds. Label all circuits clearly and accurately. This will make it easier to identify and troubleshoot circuits in the future. Consider creating a circuit directory that lists all circuits and their corresponding loads. Ensure that the sub-panel is properly ventilated. Heat can build up inside the sub-panel, which can damage the components. Provide adequate ventilation to prevent overheating. Do not block any vents or openings in the sub-panel. The NEC Article 408.20 requires that enclosures for overcurrent devices be mounted in a vertical position unless that is shown to be impractical, and when the equipment is installed in a damp or wet location, it should be placed in an enclosure identified for use in such locations according to NEC 312.2. Ensure that the area around the sub-panel is kept clean and free of debris. Dust and dirt can accumulate inside the sub-panel and cause problems. Clean the sub-panel periodically to prevent buildup of contaminants. When installing a sub-panel, it's important to understand the different types of wiring methods that are allowed by the NEC. Some common wiring methods include non-metallic sheathed cable, also known as Romex, electrical metallic tubing (EMT), and rigid metal conduit (RMC). The choice of wiring method will depend on the specific application and local codes. Romex is commonly used for residential wiring and is relatively easy to install. EMT is a thin-walled metal conduit that provides good protection for wires. RMC is a thick-walled metal conduit that provides the best protection for wires and is often used in industrial applications. When running wires through walls or ceilings, be sure to follow the NEC guidelines for protecting the wires from damage. This may involve using conduit or other protective measures. Also, be sure to properly support the wires so that they do not sag or drip. The NEC provides guidelines for supporting wires at specific intervals. Before beginning any electrical work, it's important to obtain the necessary permits from the local building department. Permits are required for most electrical work and help to ensure that the work is done safely and in accordance with local codes. The building department will typically review the plans for the electrical work and inspect the work after it is completed. When applying for a permit, be sure to provide all the necessary information, including a detailed description of the work to be done, a list of the materials to be used, and a diagram of the electrical circuits. The building department may also require a copy of the electrical contractor's license. Remember that electrical work can be dangerous, and it's important to take all necessary precautions to protect yourself and others. Always disconnect power to the circuit before working on any electrical components. Use appropriate personal protective equipment, such as insulated gloves and safety glasses. If unsure about any aspect of the installation, consult a qualified electrician. Remember to use the correct size breaker for the wire. This is important for protecting the wire from overcurrent. The NEC provides guidelines for selecting the correct size breaker for a given wire size. For example, a 14-gauge wire is typically protected by a 15-amp breaker, while a 12-gauge wire is typically protected by a 20-amp breaker. Never use a breaker that is larger than the ampacity of the wire. This can lead to overheating and fire hazards. Additionally, when connecting the wires to the breakers and terminals, be sure to use the correct type of connectors. There are different types of connectors for different types of wires and terminals. Using the wrong type of connector can lead to loose connections and electrical problems. Be sure to follow the manufacturer's instructions when installing connectors. Also, when working with electrical panels, be sure to maintain proper clearances around the panel. The NEC requires that there be adequate space around electrical panels for safe access and maintenance. This includes providing enough space in front of the panel for a person to stand and work, as well as enough space on the sides and top of the panel for ventilation and access to components. Do not block the area around the electrical panel with storage or other obstructions. Ensure that all unused openings in the electrical panel are properly closed. Unused openings can create a safety hazard and allow dust and debris to enter the panel. Use knockout plugs or other approved methods to close any unused openings. When working with electricity, it's always better to be safe than sorry. If unsure about any aspect of the installation, consult a qualified electrician. A qualified electrician has the knowledge and experience to perform electrical work safely and in accordance with local codes. Hiring a qualified electrician can help to prevent electrical problems and ensure the safety of the home. Lastly, remember to keep all electrical components dry. Moisture can cause corrosion and electrical problems. Protect electrical components from rain, snow, and other sources of moisture. If electrical components get wet, dry them thoroughly before using them.